Hey, patrons, thanks so much for the support. You rock. Hey everybody, I got done listening to Before They Are Hanged by Joe Abercrombie, and I want to give you this unedited review upon finishing the book, which was just a few days ago because I was on vacation and I didn't record my video while I was there. So this is a reread for me. I loved this book. It's one of my favorite books that I've ever read. So what did I think about it on my reread? You know, in general, I love my rereads because I'm only rereading stuff that I already love. But did I like this one more or less upon my reread? And I can confidently say that I liked this one more. And not a little bit more. I liked it a lot more. It's one of my favorite First Law books, and the First Law is, I think, my second or third favorite fantasy series of all time. I mean, it's right up there. And yeah, I always thought of this one as like one of the weakest ones in the series. Certainly in the First Law trilogy. Now, this series is broken up. You can think of it into series of 3. You have this initial trilogy, the First Law trilogy. Then you have 3 standalone books that break up the first trilogy and the final trilogy. And the final trilogy is called the 𝐒𝐮𝐩𝐻 Madness. But I always thought of this second one as significantly flawed compared to the first and the third books. I know what my problem was. I know why I felt that way, but I no longer feel that way. I've changed my mind. And I can confidently say that I like this one a good amount more than I liked the first book. And that's certainly a change. It kind of blows my mind that I'm feeling that way because it's a big departure from my initial feelings. And before I go into all of the details about what I liked and didn't like, and I don't think I didn't like anything here, but all the things that I liked about this book, let me go into more why I liked this more the second time than the first one. My big problem with the second book was the ending. Now, I have talked a lot. If you're familiar with my channel, you will always hear me say that I put a lot of stock into endings, and that a good ending can rescue a mediocre book, and a bad ending can kind of ruin a great book. The ending of this second book is extremely unique, and I don't want to ruin anything about this. I do non-spoiler reviews here, but the ending of this book is very different from what you would normally expect out of a fantasy book. It very much is contrarian in what it's trying to do. Now, if you've read this book and you're like, what exactly is he talking about? I think the best hint I could do is there is a group on a journey throughout large portions of this book, and what happens on the end of their journey left me a little disappointed the first time I read it. Now, since then, I've read a lot of fantasy books, and I've also finished this series. So I'm able to read this book now with the benefit of hindsight, right? So I think the big difference for me is that I now know that it was for a reason. I can't totally say what the reason is, other than saying Joe Abercrombie, I think, wants to subvert a lot of traditional fantasy tropes, which he very much did in the second one. But it was there for a purpose. And I felt like when I finished this the first time, I thought, has Joe Abercrombie just lost it? Is the plot running away from him? Is he doing that thing that a lot of fantasy authors do where they're unable to wrap up a series? No. He wrapped up the series wonderfully. It's one of the best wrap-ups that I've ever read in terms of a trilogy or any really fantasy series. So now knowing that, and knowing that we do get a wonderful ending, this middle book serves a great purpose. And I was able to read it without that level of disappointment that I had the first time. I also watched an interview with Abercrombie, and I don't remember what booktube channel it was. But they did this interview with Joe Abercrombie that I thought was really fascinating. And he said something that seems rather simple. And I'm sure most of you watching this would be like, yeah, obviously, we know that. But it really dawned on me when he said it. But he said that, that he writes his books not as individual books. He writes them as a series. And when people judge individual books, it's almost a disservice because that's not the story he's trying to tell. You should finish the series before really forming your opinion on said series. And yeah, that's a great point. Now, am I going to stop reviewing individual books before I finish the series? No, I'm not. But when I reread these books, I can certainly have a different appreciation for them. And that's what happened here. He is telling a greater story here. That was just a piece of it, and I didn't get the final story. So anyways, that's the difference. Now let's go into the book itself. The book itself. The plot here. Now, without spoiling things, this plot here is really divided up into two major sections. You had the first story here, which was kind of meandering. It didn't really tell a cohesive plot. It was really a character piece that was really just trying to set the pieces on the board, get you introduced to these wonderful characters, and then ends. This book doesn't. This book does have a cohesive plot, and really what it's trying to do is to tell you three distinct stories at the same time, and that have a very nice beginning, middle, and end to them. On one story, you have a group, this motley crew of people that do not get along, that are tasked with going on a fetch quest. Now that seems boring. Fetch quests suck in video games, but it works great here because it just gives you more dynamic with these characters to be able to converse with each other, to go through trials, and to ultimately see where they wind up. And just the way that they communicate with each other. Some of my favorite characters in the series are in this group, and watching them grow and develop, especially, a couple of the characters. I don't really want to say more than that because I really hate spoilers. But there's a lot of character progression that goes here, and I enjoyed that story. That's the one that I had a problem with initially. Then you also get the story following 𝐒𝐤𝐬𝐻. 𝐒𝐤𝐬𝐻 is tasked with defending a siege on this foreign city. And it's not foreign, it's in a different continent, but it's part of this ruling world that they're in. And he doesn't have military experience as of late, and he has to pull upon his past to try to figure out how to rescue this city. It's a great story. I love sieges. That's a fascinating concept to me. So to see that in action here, to see what's actually going on and preparing for this conquest was great. And then the final story you get is a story of a military battle between these two different sides. The side that you're really rooting for and the side that you hate. And watching them ramp up this battle and finally get into it is great. So all three portions of this book, they really did, even though it's a second book, have great beginning, middle, and ends. And that's really, really difficult to have in a second book. And it's one of the best second books of all time for that reason. Then you get to the world building. The world here is amazing. I love it. It doesn't truly have anything like really unique in it. It feels kind of cookie cutter, but it works so well because everything is so explained in such great detail by Joe Abercrombie. He, strangely enough, doesn't like to map out his world. People have made unofficial maps, but I can visualize it. I know where everything's at. He's introducing new areas. There's two new continents in this story that you're getting to feel and go through and dealing with these different foreign people that are trying to interact with these people. It's great stuff. And it's a world that I never forgot. Like no part of it did I forget in the years that it's been since I read these books initially to when I'm reading them now. And that's great world building because I've read books recently that are already more forgetful to me in their worlds. And if you ask me in a year or two to name a city in them, I will be absolutely clueless. If you tell me what's different about this part of the world than the next, I'll have no idea. But till the end of my days, I hope, unless I get like dementia or something, I'll be able to tell you intimately everything about this world. And that's just awesome. The magic system here. The magic is not great. Never been a fan of this magic system. It's just so soft and nothing super makes sense. Characters have powers. You get a little explanation for why they have them. But there's not a ton of it. It's very light on the magic front. But you dig at these fantasy elements involved with these kind of foreign creatures that are out there. And you're kind of dipping your toes in because it's hinted at the whole time. You're hearing this story about the way that things were and the way that things could be that really do fascinate you from the fantasy end. But this book I almost think of it as like fantasy light, It's fantasy in the sense that it's a foreign world. It does have some magic to it. It does have some foreign creatures to it, but it's not the prominent parts of these stories. Not even close. It's an afterthought. So yeah, but I'm counting it fantasy. I think unquestionably it is, but not strong. It's not, sword and sorcery kind of magic. That's not what we're doing here. The characters. The characters are where this story excels. They are the best characters in all of fantasy. And I say characters plural because there are multiple extremely well-written characters here. In fact, I would go as venture to say that every character in this story is wonderfully written. Now, a lot of them get more screen time. Some of them are truly like the best of the genre. I'm looking at you, 𝐒𝐿𝐼𝐻. I'm looking at you, Logan Ninefingers. I'm looking at you, 𝐵AEZ. There's a lot of characters like that. 𝐒𝐫 that are just, you can think of them as like a cousin to other fantasy characters that we know in other stories, but they're just better in every way. I love them. I think Abercrombie is probably in the god tier in terms of character writing. Off the top of my head, I can't think of anybody that I like more than him. Maybe like a 𝗏𝗏𝗏. But even then, I think Abercrombie might take the cake. It's just amazing. And then you get to the prose, and the prose is also kind of up there in the god tier. It's incredible. It's not flowery. This is a grimdark story. There's no happiness to be had here. And the prose isn't this purple prose, but it's dang intriguing. It's fun. And it's hard to write fun prose. But that's what happens here. It constantly, at least for me, have a smile on my face going through this story. And it's because of the wonderful way that this guy writes the book. Abercrombie's a genius. And so many times characters say something that just makes me laugh. It makes me, sad. It evokes all the emotions, not because of the events that are happening, but because of the way that he writes them. I will finally add in this, and I've said it before, but is it Stephen Pacey? Something Pacey? Whatever. Pacey, the narrator here, is the best. Nobody's done it better than him. It's truly a treat to be able to listen to this in an audiobook. It's by far the superior way to consume this content. Now, would this story still be incredible if you read this? Yeah. But it takes it to a new level. Every character has this unique voice. It feels like there's a team of actors here, and not just like a team of, good actors, a team of like experts. And the fact that it's all coming from one guy is just mind-blowing. And I will never be able to even hear the name of any of these characters without having that voice just perfectly in my head. And it's the best. So if you're not an audiobook fan and you're thinking like, what's a good fantasy book that I might want to get into audiobooks? First Law. It starts there. It doesn't end there, but that's where it starts. It all does kind of go downhill from there, but you will get hooked if you try this in audiobook. So I'm about wrapped up here on this review. I am so looking forward to reading the final one here, The Last Argument of Kings, which I know is the best book of this trilogy, and I know that it will remain that way for me. And there's so many events that happen in that book that I can't wait to read about. And maybe more than any other book that I'm going to be reading in the next few months, that's the one I'm looking forward to. So, wrapping it up there, thank you so much for watching this review, and as always, happy reading to you. As always, I want to give a shout out to my patrons, especially my Ascendant tier and Librarian tier patrons, Anna G, Brian, CJ, Darren, Jonathan, My Book is Lit, Nathan T, Nev's Book Channel, Ron Reich, Russell, Ryan L, Anna, Andra, Angela, Ben, Blair, Brock, Evan, Harry B, Jamie, Jeff Pixler, Joe, Maria, Michael Sugarman, Sky, TW57, Wacky, and Zion.